You don't have to speak to be felt. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to show up, and your aura, it does the rest. They don't fear your voice. They fear the way you walk in without saying a word. And suddenly, the entire room goes quiet. Because that's what happens when your presence carries truth. Unspoken, undeniable, louder than words ever could be. There's something terrifying about a person who no longer needs to speak to make an impact. You used to explain yourself. You used to prove your intentions. You used to overextend your energy just to be understood. Not anymore. Now, your silence is the presence. Your stillness is the storm. You walk into a space and they feel it, the shift, the weight, the depth. They don't know what's changed, but they know you did. And that change, it wasn't loud, it was private, built in isolation, forged in disappointment, sharpened by betrayal. That's what makes it powerful. People expect you to be loud when you're hurt, to scream when you're angry, to lash out when disrespected, but your evolution came in the form of silence, not the kind that hides, the kind that watches, that calculates, that doesn't need to react because it already knows. They don't fear the ones who shout, they fear the ones who see through everything and say nothing, because those are the people who no longer seek approval. They no longer beg for love. They no longer need the room to validate their worth. And when you become that person, you don't have to make noise. You become the noise. They try to figure out what you're thinking. They question if they still matter. They replay every word they ever said, hoping to find a clue. Because when your aura grows stronger than your voice, they start listening more closely, even when you're saying nothing. You used to be predictable. They always knew how you'd react. A message late? You'd ask why. A mood shift? You'd chase clarity. A cold silence? You'd break it. But not anymore. Now you're unreadable. You hear everything, but you say nothing. You notice the change in tone, the delay in energy, the off vibes, the fake smiles. You just don't entertain it now. You used to explain. Now you disappear. No announcement, no warning, just gone, and they panic because silence leaves space for reflection. And in that space, they see themselves. They wonder what you saw. They wonder what you felt. They wonder when the shift happened. But you don't give them answers. You don't give them access. You don't flinch anymore. You don't chase anymore. You just observe. And that stillness, it's terrifying because they know they pushed you. They know they tested your limits, and now they don't know where they stand. They don't know if they're forgotten or forgiven. And that confusion, that's the price of underestimating your silence. You don't argue now. You just look through them. You don't repeat yourself. You just leave the table. They thought your silence was weakness, but it was preparation. Now you're fluent in detachment. Now you protect your energy. And the most powerful part, you never raised your voice. You just raised your standards. You were gentle. You were present. You showed up when no one else did. You answered the late calls. You forgave the silent treatments. You explained things you never should have had to. You were patient. You were real. And they got used to that. They got comfortable with your warmth. They expected your grace. They assumed you'd never leave. But then came the switch, the shift they didn't see coming. You stopped explaining, you stopped reminding, you stopped giving warnings. You trained them with kindness, and then you trained them with silence. At first, they didn't notice. They thought it was just space, just a phase. But space turned into absence, and absence turned into peace, your peace. Now they feel it, the gap where your energy used to be. They reach out and all they touch is emptiness. They say your name and all they hear is echo. You used to give them light. Now you give them shadows. You used to carry the bond. Now you carry your worth. And the distance you created, it wasn't punishment. It was protection. Protection from their inconsistency, from their emotional games, from their temporary love. You didn't block them. You didn't insult them. You just stopped showing up. And that's what's breaking them now, because they realize the silence isn't cold. It's intentional. It's not revenge. It's a boundary, a response to everything they ignored, every moment they took you for granted. And now they understand. They were never ready for a soul like yours, but by the time they figured it out, you were already gone. There comes a point where you don't need to say a thing, because your energy, it speaks first, louder than your voice ever could. People feel it before they hear it. You walk into a room and the air shifts, not because you want attention, but because your silence holds weight. And that weight, it's truth. You used to talk through pain. Now you breathe through it. You used to explain your heart. Now you protect it. They thought your power was in your kindness, but your real strength was always in your restraint. You could have snapped. You could have exposed every lie. You could have told your side of the story, but you didn't. You let your peace do the talking, and that silence, it hits harder than any speech. They scroll through old messages now, replaying old conversations, looking for something they missed, but they didn't miss it. They just didn't listen. And now it's too late, because the moment you chose yourself, you became untouchable. Not loud, not distant, just elevated. You're not chasing clarity anymore. You're not begging for truth. You already have both, and that energy, it terrifies them, because they don't know if you've moved on or if you're just watching silently. They don't know if you still care or if they were erased the moment you healed. That's the power of evolved energy. It confuses the ones who relied on your reactions. It exposes those who mistook your love for weakness. You don't yell, you don't chase, you don't repeat. You just live and let them feel what they lost every single day. There was a time you fought to be understood. You explained your actions, defended your loyalty, tried to prove your worth. Not anymore. Now you let your presence speak, and if they can't hear it, you're not repeating yourself. You don't argue, you don't convince, you don't justify. You simply exist, because the truth doesn't need defending, and you're no longer interested in being seen by blind eyes. They used to play with your silence. Now they pray for your words, but you've outgrown the need to be heard. You've stepped into a space where peace matters more than people. You've become immune to noise, immune to begging, immune to manipulation. Now you protect your energy like gold, because it is, and not everyone deserves access. You used to show up for those who never even checked in. You used to give to those who only took. But those days are over. Your love is no longer on the clearance rack. Your time is no longer free. Your loyalty is no longer automatic. And that shift, they feel it in your silence, in your absence, in the way you don't flinch anymore. You used to explain your boundaries. Now you just enforce them without words, without warning. You stopped playing nice. You stopped overgiving. You stop shrinking to fit their comfort. Now you just stand, calm, still, unmoved. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring about yourself more. And when your presence says all that without a word, That's power, and that's what they never saw coming. You didn't scream, you didn't slam the door, you didn't leave a note, you just left. And that silence, it became a mirror. Now they sit with it, with every lie they told, every moment they went cold, every chance they took you for granted. They feel it now, not because you're gone, but because of how you left, with dignity, with calm, with nothing to prove. That's the kind of silence they never expected, because silence makes people reflect. And reflection brings guilt. And guilt, it lingers. They thought you'd fight for them, but you chose to fight for your peace. They thought you'd wait, but you walked. They thought you'd come back, but you outgrew the cycle. Now they're left with questions. Did you see it all? Did you know they were lying? Did you ever really believe them? But you're not giving them answers. You gave enough already. You gave them space. You gave them patience. You gave them loyalty. Now you give them silence. They scroll through your old messages. They rehearse the conversations that never happened. They wonder if someone else has your attention. But you're not watching. You're not waiting. You're just done. Because people think silence is nothing, but silence is heavy. It carries truth. It carries consequence. And now they carry all of it. You didn't block them. You didn't expose them. You didn't beg. You just removed yourself. And that exit, it echoes. It echoes in their quiet nights, in their distracted mornings, in their failed replacements, because what they lost wasn't loud. It was real. And now the silence you gave them is the closure they gave themselves. They say you've changed, that you're cold now, that you don't care anymore, but they're wrong. You still care. You just care differently. You care in silence. You care from distance. You care by protecting your peace. It's not bitterness. It's boundaries. You gave too much, loved too deeply, forgave too quickly, and they mistook it all for weakness. But now you move different. You speak less. You guard more. You're not here to prove you're a good person. You're not here to prove your intentions. You're not here to prove you were real. They know. They always knew. They just thought you'd never stop trying. But silence is a line, and you drew it. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. Because peace isn't found in fixing people. It's found in releasing them. You stopped reaching out, stopped replying with softness, stopped giving passes to repeated disrespect. And that decision, it saved you. Now they call you distant, they call you detached, but all you really did was return to yourself. No more breaking yourself for people who never brought glue. No more bleeding for people who couldn't handle your scars. No more trying to be understood in a language they never intended to learn. You didn't go silent to punish them. You went silent to heal you. And that silence, it became your power. Now, your boundaries are clear. If it's not real, it doesn't get close. If it feels forced, you let it go. If it disrespects your growth, you leave without a word. That's not being heartless. That's being healed. You were the calm in their chaos, the anchor in their storm, the voice that soothed even when you were breaking inside. And they thought you'd always be there. They thought they had time, but now all they have is silence. And that silence, it haunts. You don't show up anymore. You don't check in. You don't ask how they've been, because you finally asked yourself that and realized you were tired. Tired of giving, tired of explaining, tired of shrinking to be understood. You were the real thing, and they handled you like you were replaceable. Now they try to recreate the energy. They search for you in others, but all they find is noise, shallow, temporary noise, because you can't copy aura, you can't fake presence, you can't replace a soul that was built from pain and patience. You were rare, and now you're gone. And in that emptiness, they finally see it. You weren't just another option. You were the standard. You were the peace. You were the one who didn't just speak love, you lived it, but they fumbled it, and now they sit with the echo of everything they took for granted. They play your silence like a song on repeat. They imagine what they'd say, but you'll never hear it, because you're not looking back. You're not waiting for apologies. You're not checking if they've changed. You've outgrown the past, and your aura, it walks ahead of you now. It speaks before you enter, and it tells the whole story without a single word. That's what makes you powerful, not your presence, but the fact that your absence still speaks louder than anything they'll ever say.